An unseen struggle for survival is taking place around us, upon us, and inside us. We don't see it because its participants are microscopic organisms called microbes. Almost all of these organisms are harmless to us. Some types of microbes, though, prey on living human tissue, eating, poisoning, and destroying human cells. These microbes are our most dangerous enemies. Their actions cause most of the illness and disease in the world. We call all these harmful microbes germs. From the plant kingdom come harmful species of fungi. From the animal kingdom come the parasitic flukes and tapeworms. Next are the single-celled animal-like creatures known as protozoa. Only a few species of protozoans are harmful to humans. The next group, the bacteria, contains thousands of harmful species. Bacteria are simple single-celled organisms. Harmful bacteria include species that cause pneumonia, gonorrhea, syphilis, tetanus, meningitis, and scarlet fever. Invading bacteria often release chemicals that can break down the membranes and internal structures of the victim's cells. Many of them unleash toxic waste products that can be as deadly as the most potent poisons. Our last group of germs is even smaller, simpler, more elusive, and sometimes much more deadly than bacteria. These germs are viruses. A virus on its own cannot grow, reproduce, make, or use food, and there is some doubt as to whether it is really a living thing at all. It's really not much more than a bundle of genes, wrapped in a protein coating. Once inside the body, the virus penetrates a human cell. Its genetic material comes out and begins to duplicate itself. But the virus does almost none of the work itself. It uses the cell's chemical machinery and raw materials to build new viruses. The human cell is literally converted into a virus factory. Once the cell is filled with completely formed viruses, they usually break out, killing the cell in the process. Each new virus is now free to penetrate another cell and create its own horde of deadly copies. Viruses are responsible for scores of diseases, such as the common cold, flu, viral hepatitis, chickenpox, measles, mumps, polio, and acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. The microbes that threaten our health are all around us, on our food, on our skin, and in the air we breathe. How does our body protect us from these microbes? How do we manage to keep from being sick all the time? Our bodies are the scenes of constant warfare. Battles are waged between invading germs and our body defenses, which fight against disease-causing germs and allow us to live. The first and most obvious body defense is our skin, which to the naked eye appears to be smooth and even. But up close, we can see that the germs are stopped by a wall of flat, dead skin cells. A cross-section reveals that these cells lie in tightly interlocked layers, preventing germs from passing through to the living tissue beneath. Scattered across the skin surface is a series of small natural openings, pores, which might seem to be perfect entry points for germs. They're not. Sweat and oil glands connected to the pores secrete substances that are poisonous to many types of bacteria. and the continual outward motion of fluid through the pores makes it difficult for germs to gain entry. This outward motion is especially important along some of our weakest defense points, the large natural openings. The outward motion of our body's urinary wastes, male and female reproductive fluids, and digestive wastes keeps germs from venturing very far up the tubes leading from these openings. In addition, the linings of these tubes secrete a sticky mucus that entraps debris and germs and also flows outwards. The same cannot be said for our nose and mouth. Here, the motion is inwards. Food and drink enter and move toward our digestive system. Air enters our respiratory system, and along with them come millions of germs. Germs that enter through the nose and mouth are usually trapped on the mucous membrane. A carpet of hair-like cilia moves the mucus along with a wave-like motion, directing it towards the throat. Both food and air pass through this part of the throat. Up ahead, the passage divides. Food goes this way. Air goes this way, towards the lungs. The defensive strategy is to send all mucus, along with all the entrapped debris and germs, this way, to the stomach. The stomach's strong digestive juices are more than enough to destroy almost any invading germ. The natural openings, then, have adequate safeguards of their own for dealing with the intrusion of harmful microbes. But what about unnatural openings? As tough as the surface of our skin might be to the hordes of microbes that fill the air and swarm its surface, it is not impenetrable. In fact, it's fairly easy to burn or cut through the skin. This, of course, is just the opportunity germs need to mount an invasion, and that's exactly what they do. Their invasion, however, triggers a number of defense mechanisms that serve to localize and minimize the infection. Initially, the flow of blood impedes the invader's progress. Eventually, the blood helps to form a temporary protective patch, a scab. Of course, these defenses occur without our conscious control. But we can also protect ourselves from harmful germs by practicing good hygiene. Frequent washing and dental care drastically cut down on the amount of germs present on the surfaces of the teeth and skin. Extra care at the sites of healing wounds is especially important. You can also avoid contact with germs by keeping your environment clean. Germs tend to congregate in unclean places, especially bathrooms. Remember, the foods we eat and the fluids we drink can carry dangerous microbes. It's important to use common sense with any food, trusting the warning signals our senses of sight, taste, and smell might be sending us. And, of course, never eat anything that's been resting on an obviously unclean and potentially germ-infested surface. Since so many illnesses can be transmitted from person to person, we have to be careful around anyone who is sick. Avoid contact whenever you can. Surfaces handled by sick people can be covered with germs. Touching them yourself can then bring the germs into your own body. And yet, even after taking these precautions, germs can get through our skin barrier or make it past the mucous membranes. Once inside, they can multiply and destroy our living cells. To combat invading microbes, our body maintains an army of defending microbes. The fight will be one-on-one, microbe against microbe. Our defenders are classified with the formed elements of the blood. They are the warrior white blood cells, the phagocytes and lymphocytes, and our bodies contain about 20,000 million of them. The phagocytes form the front line of defense. They are capable of engulfing and devouring just about anything they encounter that might be harmful to the body. Here we see phagocytes attacking bacteria. This process is called phagocytosis, which means to eat. If it weren't for these voracious eaters, we'd be sick all the time. But what happens if there are more invaders than the phagocytes can handle? That's when the lymphocytes come into action. There are different types, and they are involved in different aspects of the immune response. Their overall objective is to identify the invaders and defeat them. The lymphocytes are truly our final line of defense. Phagocytes and lymphocytes are on constant patrol for invading germs. Some of them have the ability to move to any spot in the body, squeezing between the cells of our living tissues. They are abundant along the highways of the body, the circulatory system, and the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is especially important to our defenders because it is their headquarters. At the junctions of lymphatic vessels are bean-shaped lumps of tissue called lymph nodes, each of which is packed with phagocytes and lymphocytes. Our friend here has caught a viral infection, a cold. We've all seen the symptoms before, but what's really happening inside him? How are the phagocytes and lymphocytes battling the invading virus? Here we see phagocytes fighting what now appears to be a losing battle against the rapidly multiplying virus. The viruses are inside many of the tissue cells. The phagocytes can only catch a few of them as they leave ruptured cells on their way to infect others. This large phagocyte is called a macrophage. It differs from the other phagocytes in its ability to display a part of the virus on its surface, even after the virus has been engulfed. Behind the macrophage is a lymphocyte known as a helper T cell. Its function is to identify the invader and get this information back to the other lymphocytes. The helper T cell latches on to the virus, binding itself to the surface of the macrophage and identifying the invader. This bit of virus identified by the cell is called an antigen. The helper T cell begins to multiply. Each duplicate carries with it the vital information on the antigen's identity. Soon, the duplicate helper T cells begin arriving at the lymph nodes. Here, packed hordes of lymphocytes have been lying dormant, waiting for just this moment to spring into action. The antigen's identity is passed on to the waiting lymphocytes. Some begin to change, enlarging and multiplying, becoming activated B cells and killer T cells. The lymph nodes swell as the lymphocytes prepare for battle. Our friend actually feels this process. As the large concentration of lymph nodes enlarges, his neck becomes swollen and tender. The activated B cells are a kind of arms factory. The weapons they manufacture are antibodies. Antibodies are Y-shaped molecules with connections on the ends that are made to specifically fit onto the antigen. Antibodies and killer T cells stream out from the lymph nodes to seek out the viral invaders. So far, the virus has been having an easy time, with only the phagocytes to fight against. Now it will be different. The virus now faces a full immune response. This is a killer T cell. Its function is to kill cells that have already become infested with the virus. A bit of antigen on the surface of this cell betrays the presence of replicating viruses inside. The killer T cell recognizes the antigen. It can release a deadly chemical that punctures holes in the cell's membranes. The target cell blows apart. The viruses outside the cells are not going to last long because out in the open, they are sitting ducks for the antibodies. Their custom-made connectors fit onto the antigens. They coat the viruses, rendering them harmless. Antibodies also have the ability to stick to one another, creating clumps of antibody-coated viruses. Easy targets for phagocytes. The presence of antibodies actually stimulates the phagocytes to even greater eating activity. With killer T cells blasting open the virus's hiding places and antibodies coating them when they're out in the open, the battle turns into a mop-up operation for the phagocytes. Now, another type of lymphocyte is called up, the suppressor T cell, whose job is to slow down and stop the activated B cells and the killer and helper T cells. Basically, they call off the attack. But our lymphocytes do not simply return to normal. Special T cells and B cells, known as memory cells, were formed during the fighting. They carry information about the antigen's identity and keep it at hand for years. Should this particular virus attack again, the memory cells will get the immune response into action quicker. So quick, in fact, that our friend won't even have a runny nose. Our friend also has memory cells for the measles virus. He had measles a few years back. Now these memory cells ensure that he'll never be sick from measles again. He is immune to measles. The same applies to these mumps memory cells. He is also immune to mumps. Here are memory cells for polio. He is immune to this deadly disease, even though he never had it. But when he was little, he was given polio shots. The carefully prepared serum in these shots contained actual polio antigens, not enough to make him seriously ill, but enough to trigger the immune response and the formation of memory cells, which will protect him against any real exposure he might get in the future. A number of diseases, such as polio and smallpox, have been brought under control, some of them practically eliminated, thanks to immunization programs. Our friend here has gotten over his cold. Does this mean that he's now developed an immunity to cold germs? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. Many germs, especially cold and flu viruses, come in many slightly different varieties, and they are constantly mutating. The memory cells that protect him from the virus that caused his last cold may be ineffective against the cold virus he'll be exposed to 6 months from now, because it's just different enough to escape their detection. In 1981, scientists identified a new and deadly disease spreading throughout the world. It is caused by this virus. It's called Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, AIDS. AIDS is deadly because it attacks a vital link in our immune response, the helper T cell. When the AIDS virus is transmitted from person to person, almost always through blood or semen, it is encased inside an afflicted helper T cell or macrophage. From here, the virus begins spreading through the healthy person's bloodstream. The AIDS virus has the ability to recognize helper T cells and move into them. Now, instead of calling the B cells and killer T cells into action to destroy the invader, the helper T cell is turned into a factory for replicating more AIDS virus. The invasion spreads from one helper T cell to another, killing them in the process. Without enough healthy helper T cells, the immune response becomes hopelessly ineffective, and the AIDS victim becomes easy prey for other germs. AIDS victims usually die with a number of infections raging within their bodies, pneumonia being the most common killer. There is presently no cure for AIDS. The only defense we have against this disease is to avoid getting it in the first place. Here are 2 ways to avoid AIDS. First, be certain that you never have intimate sexual contact with someone who is infected with the AIDS virus. Second, be extremely careful around hypodermic needles. If you should be stuck by a needle that has been used by someone with the AIDS virus, you could be infected too. Unfortunately, large numbers of people do not take these precautions. Because of this, the number of AIDS victims is growing, and unless a cure is found soon, they will eventually die from it. We still need to know more about immune responses. Immunology is a young science. 20 years ago, scientists would have been at a loss to understand how the AIDS virus kills its victims, or why it is impossible to be completely immune to colds. When polio and smallpox were defeated, it was thought that the end of all infectious diseases was just around the corner. The more we learn, the more we see that there is still a long way to go.